All right. Thank you for joining us today. So this session is meant to be an overview of the multifamily housing property type for those who are new to benchmarking or those looking for a refresher. We'll also be reviewing some of the common mistakes seen when benchmarking as a campus, parking, accessing whole building energy data, and solar net metering. So before we get too far, I want to take some time to go over some of the basics of the multifamily housing property type to set the stage for our subsequent topics. So what is a multifamily housing property? Multifamily housing properties must have 2 units or more per building, 20 units or more per property or campus, and have at least 80% occupancy. Single-family home communities would not qualify as a multifamily housing property. However, townhomes would qualify as long as there are 2 units or more per building. One of the most common mistakes that arises when benchmarking multifamily housing properties is classifying residential units within the correct setting. So there are 3 settings that units can fall into, either low-rise, mid-rise, or high-rise. However, these settings refer to the number of floors in the building that they are located on, not the floor that each unit is on. For example, if a single building with 7 floors has 40 units on floors 1 through 4 and 20 units on floors 5 through 7, all 60 of those units should be benchmarked as mid-rise. So let's walk through an example. When benchmarking the single 20-story multifamily building, the applicant may think to report the 40 residential units on floors 1 through 4 as units in a low-rise setting, the 40 residential units on floors 5 through 9 as mid-rise, and the 80 residential units on floors 10 through 20 as high-rise. But because all of these units are in a single high-rise structure, all 160 units in this building should be classified in the high-rise setting. The only time when units should be split up into different settings is if there are multiple buildings or towers with different amount of floors. So in this case, you'd want to place the number of units in the setting of the specific tower or building they are in. Let's take a look at another example here, this time being a multifamily campus with several buildings of different heights. When benchmarking this 10-building multifamily complex with a single building that is 7 stories tall and the rest of the 9 buildings are 3 stories tall, the applicant will want to classify all 50 of the units in the 10-story building as high-rise, regardless of what floors these units happen to be on in the high-rise building. 15 of the units in the 7-story building as mid-rise, and all 50 of the units in the 9 3-story buildings as low-rise. Another common mistake is for applicants to only include the living unit spaces in their multifamily housing properties gross floor area, or GFA. Living spaces, common areas, hallways, etc. must all be included. The gross floor area should also include the square feet of the other building uses, including ground floor retail, restaurants, health clubs, etc. Retail spaces should be broken out as a separate use type if they exceed 5,000 square feet and have exterior entrances to the public. Restaurants, health clubs, and other non-scorable spaces should be broken out if it accounts for 25% or more of the total building gross floor area. The only spaces that should not be included are spaces that are not fully enclosed. Additionally, if shared amenities or leasing offices exist in their own structures separate from the living units, their building gross floor area must also be included in the whole property's gross floor area. So now that we've covered some of the basics, we'll cover benchmarking as a campus. Only the 5 property types mentioned above can apply for certification as a campus. So that would be hospitals, hotels, K-12 schools, multifamily housing, and senior living communities. Any property type can be benchmarked as a campus if that's what works best for the building owner or manager, but only these 5 property types will be able to earn a score and certification as a campus. In fact, for those property types, if the property consists of multiple buildings, not only can they certify as a campus, but they must certify as a campus. So these 5 property types cannot cherry pick individual buildings for certification, but they must include all buildings on the property. And it's the licensed professional's responsibility to make sure they're doing so. It's often helpful for building owners to benchmark and measure the performance of single buildings while also tracking how they contribute to the campus-wide performance. So you may choose to benchmark both single buildings and the multi-building campus configuration simultaneously. When determining if a property is a campus, it's important to take a look at the collection of buildings to see if they function as a whole property as opposed to individual structures. While buildings in a campus are generally owned and operated by the same party, this may not always be the case. It is possible for buildings to be owned and operated separately, but still be required to benchmark as a campus. Additionally, a property's metering configuration is not a factor in determining whether buildings function as a campus or not. Similarly, with building ownership management, sharing of HVAC systems, buildings can be separately metered and still be considered a campus. One good rule of thumb to determine if a group of buildings is a campus is to ask if the property's operations would be substantially affected if one building was relocated. This is why even for buildings that are owned or operated by separate organizations, if they share amenities or a leasing office, they're still required to benchmark as a campus. If one of the buildings were to be relocated, the tenants in that building would no longer have access to amenities they would normally have. Another common scenario is when a group of buildings are completed in separate phases, and applicants will benchmark and apply for certification for the different phases separately. While the buildings may be completed and in use at different times, once they're completed and in use, the buildings in both phases function as a single cohesive property. They are leased together by the same staff, are listed together on the same website, share a variety of amenities. Therefore, they cannot earn certification separately. Even if the buildings are separated by a main road, if they function as a whole property, they should still be benchmarked as a campus. So let's take a look at this multifamily housing campus. On this image, you can see that there are several buildings included in this property. Noticeably, there's a single non-living structure that looks like a pool house, number 8 here, circled, that should be included. So, for example, let's say buildings 1 through 3 were completed in 2010. That's this subset here. Buildings 4 through 7 were built and completed in 2015. And buildings 8 through 10 were built and completed in 2020. As additional structures are completed and are ready to be leased out, they should be added into the existing property that contains the 3 original buildings. So these should all eventually, once built and completed and operating, be benchmarked as a single property. In this example, we can see a multifamily housing property with 2 towers. Even if the towers were built separately, they are still required to benchmark and earn certification together. In this case, the 2 towers are connected by the first 4 floors, which is considered a shared functional indivisible space. Therefore, these 2 towers would be considered a single building. This is also an example where it would be appropriate for the number of units to be placed in separate settings. The middle section of the property only has 5 floors, and therefore should be benchmarked as a mid-rise, while the 2 tower structures should be benchmarked as a high-rise. Now that we've covered campus configurations, let's take a look at parking. So parking is a section of the application that is often tricky. To review, if parking area is submetered or separately metered and can therefore be excluded, it is best not to include this area or its energy use in the application. At the end of the day, the Energy Star score aims to assess your building's energy performance and not the energy performance of your building's parking space. If you cannot exclude your parking, then parking must always be entered as a separate parking property use and should not be included in the main property use square footage. In this case, Portfolio Manager will estimate and back out the parking energy use to generate a score for the building's energy performance. So this leads us to common mistake number 4, including private garages in parking space. There are many townhomes or duplexes with private attached or detached garages. A common mistake is for people to include these spaces in the parking square footage or in the building square footage. Private residential garages and carports cannot be counted as parking because Portfolio Manager assumes parking garages operate 24 hours a day with ventilation and lighting, which many private garages do not. Next, we'll take a look at accessing and reporting whole building energy data. So for a multifamily housing property to be eligible to apply for Energy Star certification, it will need 12 months of whole building measured energy data, including energy used in all common spaces and individual tenant spaces across all fuel types used at the property. EPA is aware that one of the major barriers to benchmarking and improving the energy efficiency of multifamily and other property types with multiple individually metered tenants is access to whole building measured energy data. While EPA cannot directly make that available, we are participating in numerous meetings and activities aimed at engaging utilities in discussions regarding solutions to this challenge. A number of utilities already provide this data to customers upon request. Those can be found in the interactive map linked here. If your utility is not one that already provides whole building energy data, there are certain measures that we recommend to building owners. These measures include installing a master meter on the property if it's financially or technologically feasible, asking residents to provide the meter data upon request. This option works best when there aren't too many tenants. To facilitate this, some landlords are including these requirements in leases, or you can coordinate with your utility by getting a tenant release form from all tenants. Finally, you can also consider joining the groups calling on utilities to make this data available so that more utilities will work towards data access solutions. And next, we will cover solar net metering. If a multifamily housing property generates on-site green power and consumes all of the green power on-site, for example, no energy sent back to the grid, the process of benchmarking this energy is fairly straightforward. However, if energy is generated on-site and sent back to the grid, there are some guidelines to consider. In the next slide, I'll go over a diagram of the different energy flows when it comes to solar net metering. So this diagram helps visualize the different flows of energy. The energy flows circled in blue are the values that are needed in order to properly benchmark on-site solar generation. However, many net metering setups do not have access to all 3 of these flows, and you may only have access to the energy flows outlined in the red squares. Just having access to flows R and N will not allow you to benchmark net metered energy correctly. But if you're able to obtain flows RU, REX, or flow G, in addition to flows R and N, then you will be able to isolate the required energy flows. When benchmarking on-site renewable energy, the most common mistake applicants make is benchmarking the net metered electric grid value as opposed to the total energy purchased. Many utilities provide credits to properties that energy from their on-site system sent back to the grid, and may only provide the total energy purchased minus the energy sent back to the grid in the bill. If this is the case, the applicant will need to work with the utility to obtain the other flows of energy to be able to benchmark electric grid consumption properly. The values entered should capture total energy purchased before any utility credits are provided. And with that, we have a pop quiz here. So you get to apply your knowledge. The question's a bit long, so I'll read it out loud. A building with on-site solar panels receives their monthly electric bill, which shows a net electricity consumption value of 90,000 kilowatt hours. That month, the property's solar array generated 20,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, 15,000 of which was used on site, and 5,000 of which was sent back to the grid. Because the panels generated more energy than the building used and the excess was sent to the grid, that building received a credit for that excess on their energy bill. That is, the property is net metered. What values should be entered in the building's grid electric meter in Portfolio Manager for that month, with emphasis on the grid electric meter? And the poll should be open on your screen. You can select one of the options. I'll give you about a minute to respond. Jasmine, how are we looking on responses?
Looks like we have about 50% of our attendees on the line with having finished the polling question.
Okay, let's give another 15 or 20 seconds. Okay, let's flip over to the answer here. And the correct answer is F, 95,000 kilowatt hours. Looks like about 4% of us got that one right. So let's go over why that is the case. Net metered solar PV systems can be tricky because the utility doesn't always provide all the information needed to get the values required for the application. In this case, we know that the net metered value, so the total grid purchased electricity minus the solar electricity sent from the PV system to the grid, is 90,000 kilowatt hours. Since we know that 5,000 kilowatt hours were sent from the solar panels to the grid, that must mean that the total grid purchase was 95,000 kilowatt hours. And with that, we've reached the end of our content for today, but we did want to end with a reminder for 2021 certification. The application deadline is Friday, December 10th, and we will also be, there's currently a 120-day rule suspension. We will be reinstating that rule on January 1st of 2022. So you'll need to submit applications within 120 days of the period ending date of the application. And a quick note on the bottom that application processing times, as always, will increase as we start to receive more applications before the deadline. So right now, over the summer, you probably saw around 4 business days, getting a little longer, and could be up to 20 business days as we get closer to the deadline. So with that, I think we can take a look at the questions we've received. If you haven't already, you can submit questions via the webinar.